আপনারা দেখছেন টকিং পয়েন্ট।
ওয়েলকাম ব্যাক। ব্রেকের আগে আমরা কথা বলছিলাম আমাদের মাননীয় এমপি রোশনারা আলীর সঙ্গে। We talked about different aspects of garments trade and the safety and security and the loss of life, and we are all shocked about it. আরেকটা প্রশ্ন যেটা মাথায় আসে হলো ওটা overseas workers. Bangladesh has exported about 5 million workers of Bangladeshi origin are working in Malaysia, in Far East, in the Middle East, and many other countries of Europe. See, they earn about $13 billion for the government. See, but unfortunately, when they suffer, there is nobody to look after them. I'm going to ask our guest. She is the Shadow Cabinet Minister for International Trade. What are her views and how the British government and how the Shadow Cabinet can exercise influence on the government to get things better. What do you think about this situation that the 5 million workers who are working outside the country, bringing in a good deal of much needed foreign reserves, they don't get much support from either the government agencies, or when they arrive at the airport, they are mistreated.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
there's supposed to be many organizations to look after them, but at the end of the day, they don't get any legal aid. A couple of years ago, people died on roads in Saudi Arabia. They die every year.
Yeah.
Several people. 8 persons were executed for the murder of 1 person in Saudi Arabia, but nothing happened, and we did not take action in time. How can we address this situation?
Well, many people watching this will have a family member or relative or
Sure.
neighbor from Bangladesh who's working in the Middle East or in another
in
country or in Europe, in fact, and some people might be watching this. I think who are in that position. I think that we need to make sure that the international community, the international institutions take this issue of migration and abuse of migrants very seriously, because sometimes, particularly in the Middle East, some of these economies are being propped up because of migration from Africa and South Asia. I was recently at a conference in Qatar, and the native population of Qatar is only 300,000. But they require migrants to come in, and the whole economy has thrived and developed thanks in part due to the migrant labour helping to build that country. And there are still major issues with that country about housing conditions, employment conditions, and so on. And I think that so there is obviously a big role for the allies of those countries, particularly in the Middle East, to say, actually, you need to do more for those migrants who are coming to work and help build your economies than you have done in the past. These are basic human conditions and working conditions that we should all be subscribing to, minimum standards.
Right.
So that's one thing. There are, of course, international agreements and so on, but I think there needs to be another look. I think that's right. Agencies like that can play a very important role. But I think there's a role for the United Nations in making sure that there's adequate pressure on those governments who are not doing enough. When they're inviting people in to work, but actually there are inhumane conditions that people are suffering from. So there are major issues where different countries will need to come together to get better conditions for migrants, not just Bangladeshi migrants, but Indian and African migrants who go because they're invited to go and work there. They're given workers' visas, but once they arrive to that country, they find themselves in a very difficult situation. I think that there's a big role for, of course, those employers who are employing them. And we have had that in our own country where people have been mistreated, and the onus is on the employers to follow the laws, because even in this country, even though we've got very, very strict laws on protection of employees, there have been violations of their rights. So I think that's another big area where employers can play a bigger, more important role in being responsible employers, responsible businesses, which is something that we as a party have espoused, not just domestically, but also making sure that happens internationally. Businesses have a massive responsibility to the people who work for them, but also people who consume and use their goods and services.
Right. The problem nearer home. How does your party see the situation of so many students who are in this country? They came here, and some of the education institutions were closed down.
Yeah.
And then so many others, migrant workers who are here, and they have problems with visa. Are you sympathetic to their cause, or?
Well, when Labour was in power, we recognised that there's a big role for the high-skilled workers, as well as those who are less high-skilled when there was a labour shortage. When there was full employment under Labour and there was a skills mismatch, there had to be provision to allow people to come in to work and fill those jobs. But we're in a very different place now, where we've got people on our doorsteps, in our cities, in boroughs like this, who are desperately looking for work. So it means that the economic climate is very different.
But
So what we have always called for is that Labour policies have to reflect the economic conditions, and migration has to reflect that. So we need managed migration. We need to make sure the migration policy is fair, blocking non-EU migration altogether pretty much, which is what the current government's doing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you,
it's not sensible.
With so much of unemployment, we still have migrants from labour migrants coming from EU.
Yeah, but that's because we have an EU agreement where British people can go and work in France and French people can come here. That's a quid pro quo, if you like.
Yeah.
That's about having a common market. That's very different from other countries, and that is agreed through EU treaties and so on. So that's a very different set of issues.
We are contributing 53 million every day to the EU budget. Is that right?
Well, the point about the European Union is that we trade, 47% of our economic trade is the European Union, with the European Union countries. We have our people who go and work in other countries, as well as do business in other countries in Europe. Almost half of our trading. So the European Union is absolutely fundamental to the future of Britain and the British economy. And anyone that tells you otherwise is living on another planet, frankly. But there are, of course, issues which my party has raised, which is the EU budget. We believe, and that's why we voted against the government recently, we believe that the budget for the cost of running the European institutions and so on, and the budget of the European Union needs to be cut, because the current economic climate is such that everyone needs to cut their budgets, and we believe that the European Union needs to do the same. This is not the time to increase the budget. That's why we voted against any proposals to increase it.
What do you think? I received a message on the Twitter that Eurosceptics look at Commonwealth rather than the Europe itself.
Yeah, but the Eurosceptics are also often the people who say there shouldn't be any Commonwealth immigration or migration, right? So there's an inherent conflict in what they're saying. On the one hand, they'll say we should look outside of Europe to do our trade. That's not a bad argument to have. I believe we should too. We should be trading with India, with China, with Bangladesh, with, of course, the US and other, historically, we've traded with those countries too. But we should be looking at those big emerging economic markets, also in South America. You know, the growth is in South America, China, India, and Asia, across Asia, not in Europe. So, of course, we're going to need to do that. But the reality as it stands now is that we are very dependent on 47% of our trade with the European countries. And so if you want to, we have to be sensible about this. So over time, you know, in 20, 30 years' time, it may be that our trade is with as much with India and China and Bangladesh and many other countries outside of the European Union as it is within the European Union, but that's not going to happen overnight. And so it's very important that we don't cut our noses to spite our faces, which is what some of the Eurosceptics seem to be doing. They have a real kind of visceral skepticism and dislike for the European project, but actually that masks the fact that we rely on the European Union for trading and jobs and growth as well, as they do with us.
True. You issued a very powerful statement about the Middle East situation, the killings of lives of people, innocent people who died. I think about over 100 persons from the West Bank.
In Gaza.
And in Gaza, and 3 persons died in Israel. See, don't you think there is a disproportionate killing? Yet, when we talk about stopping the massacre, stopping this carnage, we in the West try to be rather aloof from the situation, say, just ask both of them to keep quiet. Of course, both of them should keep quiet. 2 persons cannot. It takes 2 to fight. But who is at the receiving end and who is at the giving end? That has to be sorted out first, don't you think so?
Well, I mean, the thing is that we all know that the situation in Gaza is intolerable. Most people will not dispute that, because you've had the blockade. People still can't get access to the
food,
things they
medicine,
need. That's right.
Clothes.
So the blockade had eased over time, but it's still a blockade, and it still means that people who live in Gaza are, living in very, very difficult conditions. And then you have, a security apparatus by the Israeli Defense Force that is very difficult for those people who are living there.
You have first-hand experience, isn't it?
Well, I went to the West Bank. I didn't. I did try to go to Gaza last year, but I wasn't able to because of security issues. But the fact is that it's only if negotiations are resumed and America takes a much stronger role and the international community can genuinely be honest brokers that we can move beyond where that cycle of conflict and the kind of devastation to people's lives. Ultimately, what people want is to live in peace and security. That doesn't exist. So, I think that what the international community's got to do is find a way to bring both sides back to the negotiation table. There is a plan by the Palestinians to get recognition of statehood in the UN. I support that. My party, I've campaigned for that, working with the Labour Friends of Palestine and others in the UK. My party supports that. We are exerting as much pressure as we can to get the government to stop sitting on the fence on this and actually support this particular desire and request by the Palestinians for recognition. We believe that actually it won't be harmful to the peace process. It will spur things on, spur the negotiations on. And I think that given what's happened in the current climate, it is very important that there is pressure applied to the Israelis as well, because they're the ones who hold the cards. They're a significant military power. They have US backing. They also have the economic assets that, the Palestinians are losing land day by day because of the settlements. So they are in a more, of course they're concerned about security too, but the fact is that it's the Palestinians who've lost their land, where there's been significant amounts of people who've faced life of refuge since the late 40s for generations, and I saw that firsthand when I went to the West Bank. So if we are to see peace, then it's going to need
we must negotiate.
It's going to need the party that's stronger and in this case it's the Israelis, to make that effort too. But that's not to say that they don't have security concerns and so on, and their concerns have been about Hamas and the rocket attacks. But the reality is, as you pointed out yourself, that the attacks that they've then subsequently made in Gaza have led to the loss of over 100 lives and loss of ordinary innocent people's lives.
Right.
And that cannot be tolerated.
True. Very interesting. We are nearly the end of the time, and we have to close up. And thank you very much for being with us. Dear viewers, it was a pleasure having Ms. Rushanara Ali with us at our studios, and she braved the weather today. It's been a wet, windy and very cold afternoon, evening in London. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
And we learned a great deal from you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.